Tomatoes have been a part of our gardens for generations. But behind every juicy, sun-ripened tomato are Grandma's few secrets and tricks she never bothered to write down because they were passed from memory to memory. Today, we're digging up those old-school tomato hacks. Some are clever tricks you've never heard of. Others are age-old methods with a twist that still work wonders today. Whether you're trying to beat disease, boost your harvest, or grow fruits so sweet they taste like candy, here are 20 secret tomato tricks Grandma never wrote down. 20. Crushed eggshells. Grandma didn't toss eggshells into the bin. She knew tomatoes loved calcium, so she saved those shells, dried them by the kitchen window, and crushed them into fine bits. When planting seedlings, she sprinkled a handful right into the hole. This simple trick helped prevent blossom end rot, that nasty black patch you sometimes see on ripening tomatoes. Eggshells break down slowly, feeding calcium into the soil over time. But that wasn't all. Sprinkling shells on top of the soil also helped deter slugs and snails, keeping them from nibbling tender stems. Either way, eggshells were never wasted. They were a cheap, natural, and endlessly useful secret for keeping tomato harvests firm, healthy, and thriving throughout the entire season. 19 upside-down tomato planters. It looked odd, but Grandma wasn't afraid to try new tricks. She'd drill holes in old metal buckets, slide tomato seedlings through so they dangled out, then hang them from porch beams. The soil went on top. Roots tucked safely inside, and the plant grew downward like a green chandelier. Why bother? For her, it saved precious garden space and kept tomatoes safe from ground pests and rot. Watering was easy too. She just poured it in from above, and gravity did the rest, carrying moisture straight to thirsty roots. Neighbors thought it looked strange until they saw her healthy, pest-free harvests swinging gently in the breeze. Upside-down growing proved Grandma knew what she was doing even when it looked upside down to everyone else. 18. Newspaper mulch. Back then, nothing went to waste, not even the daily paper. Once Grandma finished reading, those crinkled pages went straight into the garden. She laid them flat in thick layers around the tomato plants, tucking them under with practiced hands before piling straw or cut grass on top to hold them in place. Why? Because weeds hate darkness. The newspaper blocked out light so stubborn sprouts couldn't break through. At the same time, it trapped soil moisture underneath, keeping roots cool and damp, even in blistering heat. Over time, the paper softened and melted into the earth, feeding it with carbon-rich organic matter. It wasn't fancy, but it worked like magic. Weeds stayed away, and her tomatoes grew strong, just how she liked them. 17. Deep planting. Grandma never planted her tomatoes shallowly. She dug holes deep enough to bury the stems up to their top set of leaves. Before placing them in, she'd strip off the lower leaves so nothing rotted underground. She did this because tomato stems grow roots wherever they touch soil. By planting deep, her tomatoes developed thick, strong root systems. This helped them pull up more water during dry weeks and kept them standing tall against strong summer winds. While other gardens had drooping plants, hers stood firm, heavy with fruit. Modern growers often skip this old-school trick, but Grandma swore by it every season. Her secret? More roots, more fruits. 16. Aspirin spray. It sounds odd today, but back then, Grandma's garden shed always had a bottle of cheap aspirin. She knew a secret most didn't. Dissolving a couple of aspirin tablets in a gallon of water created a special foliar spray. When applied to tomato leaves every few weeks, this mix helped strengthen the plant's natural immune system. Why did it work? Aspirin contains salicylic acid, which triggers a plant's internal defenses against fungal infections and stress. Gardeners noticed fewer cases of blight and wilting after regular aspirin sprays. Some swore their plants even grew faster and yielded better fruit. They didn't know the exact science, but Grandma saw the results. Her tomatoes stood tall and lush, while others suffered with yellowing leaves. Just one of her little pharmacy to garden secrets that kept those harvest baskets full. 15. Epsom salt. When Grandma's tomato leaves started turning yellow between the veins, she didn't panic. She reached for her old paper bag of Epsom salt tucked behind the sink. Just a tablespoon stirred into a gallon of water and poured around each plant worked like magic. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, and magnesium is essential for making chlorophyll, keeping those leaves green and lush. Without it, tomato plants struggle to photosynthesize properly, leading to stunted growth and fewer fruits. Some days, she'd even dissolve a little in a spray bottle to mist directly onto the leaves for faster results. No fancy fertilizers or expensive treatments. Just a simple, humble mineral Grandma trusted to keep her tomatoes healthy and their harvests strong. 14. Milk spray. Fungal diseases have always been a tomato grower's nightmare. Back before store-bought sprays, Grandma had her own secret weapon: milk. She'd mix 1 part milk with 9 parts water in an old metal watering can, then gently mist her tomato leaves early in the morning. People thought she was wasting milk, but she knew better. The proteins in milk created a thin protective layer over the leaves, making it harder for fungal spores to stick and spread. Powdery mildew and blight didn't stand a chance if she caught them early. Best of all, it was safe, inexpensive, and always available in her kitchen. Milk spray wasn't just a folk trick, it was her reliable shield against disease every single summer. 13. Wood ash boost. When winter ended and the old wood stove was finally cleaned out, Grandma didn't just toss the ashes. She saved them in a rusty metal bucket, knowing they'd come in handy come planting time. A light sprinkle of wood ash around her tomato plants added potassium, a nutrient that helped flowers bloom and fruits develop strong and firm. She never dumped it all at once, though. Too much could raise the soil pH and harm the plants. Instead, she'd mix small handfuls into the topsoil or add it to her compost pile. This way, her tomatoes got a steady supply of potassium without risking damage. It was one of her quiet secrets. No store-bought fertilizer could match the balance that wood ash brought. 12. Baking soda spray. Grandma never waited for diseases to ruin her tomatoes. When the humid days rolled in, she reached for baking soda. Mixing 1 tablespoon with a gallon of water and a few drops of mild soap, she created a simple spray that worked like a charm. She'd coat her tomato leaves lightly every week, especially before rainstorms. The baking soda raised the leaf surface pH just enough to make it harder for fungal spores to settle and spread. It didn't cure blight if it had already set in, but it slowed it down and protected healthy plants from infection. People back then didn't have rows of fancy fungicides at the store. They used what they had in their kitchen, and Grandma's tomatoes stayed green, glossy, and disease-free long after others in the neighborhood wilted away. 11. Planting time. Grandma never trusted calendars alone. She watched nature for her gardening cues. When the elderberry trees burst into creamy white blooms along the hedgerows, she knew it was time to plant out her tomatoes. To her, older flowers meant the nights had finally warmed and the danger of frost was gone. She'd walk to the garden with baskets of seedlings in her arms, confident each one would thrive. This old-school method wasn't superstition, it was deep observation passed down for generations. Planting too early left tomatoes shivering and stunted. Waiting for elderberry blossoms saved her from replanting and gave her harvests a strong, healthy start. Today, with all our apps and forecasts, her simple nature signs still hold true. 10. Cloth ties. Grandma never wasted anything, not even old pillowcases or worn-out shirts. When her tomato plants started to sprawl and bend under their own weight, she'd grab her scissors and cut those faded fabrics into long, soft strips. Instead of using rough twine that could dig into stems, she'd tie each tomato plant gently to wooden stakes with these cloth ties. The fabric was soft enough to cradle the stems without bruising them, even on windy days. And if a strip tore from the rain or sun, she'd simply tie on another. These homemade ties were washable, reusable, and cost nothing. They held strong until harvest and kept her rows standing tall. For Grandma, they weren't just ties. They were proof that the simplest solutions often worked best. 9. Companion planting. Grandma's tomato beds were never planted alone. Basil nestled between the vines, filling the air with its peppery scent. She believed it made tomatoes taste sweeter and helped keep flies and hornworms away. Marigolds lined the edges, their golden blooms driving off root nematodes and beetles before they even reached her crops. Nasturtiums sprawled out like a living blanket, luring aphids to feast on their broad leaves instead of her precious tomatoes. None of this was written down in fancy gardening books back then. It was knowledge shared from neighbor to neighbor, proven by seasons of rich harvests. Today, gardeners call it companion planting, but to Grandma, it was simply common sense. Every plant looked out for another. 8. Banana peel fertilizer. Grandma never threw away banana peels. Instead, she turned them into a secret tomato tonic. Every time she finished her morning banana, the peel went straight into a jar of water, left to soak for a couple of days until the water turned a murky brown. She would then pour this potassium-rich water at the base of her tomato plants. Potassium is key for strong stems and healthy fruit development, helping tomatoes resist diseases and produce bigger, juicier harvests. Sometimes she'd chop the peel into small pieces and bury them an inch deep around each plant to release nutrients into the soil, slowly. Neighbors used to wonder why her tomatoes looked so lush and firm even during tough seasons. They didn't know her secret sat right there on the kitchen counter with her breakfast every morning. 7. Pie tins. Grandma's garden always sparkled, not from fairy lights, but from shiny pie tins dancing in the breeze. Birds love ripe tomatoes just as much as we do, and she knew the secret to keeping them away. She tied old aluminum pie tins to twine and strung them between tomato stakes or from low tree branches nearby. When the wind blew, the tins would spin and flash sunlight in every direction, scaring birds off before they even thought of pecking her fruit. On calm days, she'd tap them herself to make a light clinking sound that echoed across her rows. To her, it was the simplest bird repellent in the world. No fuss, no chemicals, just leftover tins and a little cleverness. 6. Natural pest control. Long before pest control sprays lined store shelves, Grandma made her own garden brews. She would gather handfuls of stinging nettles or pungent marigold leaves and soak them in buckets of water for days. The mixture turned dark and had a sharp, almost sour smell. To her, that was the smell of protection. With an old tin sprayer, she misted it onto tomato leaves, driving away aphids, whiteflies, and mites that threatened her crops. Some neighbors wrinkled their noses at the scent, but Grandma just smiled. "If it smells bad to me, it'll smell worse to them," she'd say. And she was right. Her tomatoes stood strong season after season, all thanks to her homemade herbal armor. 5. Fish trick. Nothing ever went to waste in Grandma's kitchen, not even fish scraps. After cleaning the catch of the day, she'd bury heads, bones, and trimmings deep under her tomato seedlings. She called it her secret soil booster. As the fish decayed, it slowly released rich nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus directly into the root zone. This meant her tomatoes had a constant natural fertilizer feeding them from below throughout the entire season. She always buried it deep enough so there was no smell, and so cats or raccoons wouldn't dig it up. By midsummer, her plants were taller, greener, and bursting with fruit. She'd say with a smile, "Feed the soil first, and the soil feeds you back." 4. Garlic spray. Grandma always kept pests away with something simple, garlic. Instead of buying chemical sprays, she'd crush a handful of garlic cloves and steep them in water overnight. The next morning, she strained it into a spray bottle and added a drop of dish soap to help it stick to the leaves. She sprayed this garlic solution onto her tomato plants every week. Aphids, whiteflies, and spider mites hated the strong smell and taste, leaving her tomatoes untouched. This natural trick didn't just repel pests, it also kept her garden chemical-free. Her secret weapon was hiding right in the kitchen, ensuring her tomatoes thrived while everything else stayed away. 3. Seed saving. Grandma never let tomato season end without saving seeds for the next year. When her best fruits were at peak ripeness, she'd scoop out their seeds into a jar with some water and set it on the windowsill to ferment. It looked strange, bubbling away for a few days, but she knew what she was doing. That fermentation process broke down the slimy gel coat around each seed, a substance that would otherwise prevent them from sprouting. After a good rinse and gentle rub, she'd spread them out on coffee filters to dry completely. Then they were placed in small folded paper envelopes, labeled by variety, and tucked safely into old cookie tins in her pantry. She always said, "These seeds hold next year's promise. Choose only the ones from plants that fed you best." 2. Copper wire. This is one of those old tricks you don't hear much about anymore. Grandma believed copper wire could keep tomato plants healthier. She'd take a thin piece of sterilized copper wire, about as thick as a paperclip, and carefully pierce it through the stem near the base of the plant. She said it slowly released copper into the plant, helping protect it from fungal diseases like blight. The wire stayed in place all season long, almost hidden among the leaves. Some gardeners swear by this method, while others doubt its power. But Grandma insisted it worked wonders, especially during humid summers. She'd just nod and say, "Sometimes it's the smallest thing that keeps the biggest harvest safe." 1. Most important rule. If there was one thing Grandma never skipped, it was this golden rule: never water tomato leaves. She'd stand over her plants at dawn, watering can in hand, whispering, "Keep those leaves dry, or you'll be sorry." Wet leaves invite blight, mildew, and fungal diseases that can spread like wildfire through a garden bed. She always watered at the base of the plant, early in the morning, so that the soil could warm up with the sun and roots could drink deeply before the heat set in. If she missed the morning, she'd wait until evening, making sure no water splashed up onto the stems or foliage. When pruning, she'd gather every fallen leaf to keep disease away. It might seem basic, but this simple rule meant fewer pests, stronger roots, and healthier harvests. To Grandma, watering right wasn't just a habit. It was a promise to her tomatoes to keep them safe. That's it for today's Tomato Secrets. Some might sound old-fashioned, but they kept Grandma's garden thriving year after year. Try 1 or 2 this season, and you might just grow your best tomatoes yet. See you in the next video.